Say welcome. Before we begin today's forum, I want to take a few moments to introduce myself and to thank both candidates. Today we'll hear from candidate Maria Sorolis and from Representative Ken Fleming in House District 48, which are part of Jefferson and Oldham counties. To introduce myself, I am Benjamin Geese, Director of Early Childhood Policy and Practice for the Pritchard Committee. At the Pritchard Committee, we strive to ensure a big, bold future for all Kentuckians. And while we know that the path to a larger life begins with a quality education for all, birth through post-secondary, we also understand the power of civic engagement. Strong civic engagement is a key ingredient in a healthy society. One of the ways civic engagement is measured is by voter turnout. And at Pritchard, we track voter turnout as one of 13 metrics in our Big Bold Future National Rankings report to measure citizen engagement. You'll hear a bit about the Big Bold Future report today as it's used to measure Kentucky's progress on educational and quality of life outcomes and ranks Kentucky's progress in relation to other states. The report is a helpful guide in determining where our Commonwealth is excelling and where Kentucky needs more help in putting all citizens on the path to a larger life. In the 2020 general election, Kentucky ranked 30th in the nation in voter turnout. By conducting several candidate forums in the buildup to the general election in November, our hope is to see more Kentuckians become engaged, informed citizens and to exercise their right to vote. In the words of our president and CEO, Bridget Blom, engaged communities with families and children at the center are vital to improving education outcomes in Kentucky. So before hopping into today's forum, again, we want to welcome candidates from House District 48 in Jefferson and Oldham counties. And just a quick reminder, the Pritchard Committee is a nonpartisan, non-governmental organization, and as such, we do not endorse candidates. However, we do promote strong civic engagement and candidate education. Please also remember that these forums are recorded and will be made available to the general public via the Pritchard website, social media, and to members of the local press corps. Lastly, to ensure fairness, both candidates, we'll hear from Rep. Fleming here in a bit, will be given equal time and identical questions to respond to. But for now, let's welcome candidate Maria Sorolis, a candidate for House District 48. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm a big supporter of education, so this is a very important group to me.
Well, we certainly appreciate that. I know just to get us started this morning, we want to learn a little bit more about you as a person rather than simply as a candidate. I know sometimes people see folks running for office and they think, and they kind of forget, you're a person just like us. And so I want to know really what made that call for you to enter public service? Was there a leader that you most admire? And if so, what attributes from him or her do you hope to exemplify in the Kentucky House of Representatives?
Well, the person probably that has inspired me most in my life was my grandfather, my mother's father. And he was not a politician at all, but my grandparents all immigrated from Greece in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And they were big believers in the American dream. And they were big believers that the key to upward mobility, to access to the American dream was education. And so in the 1940s, he sent my mother, which was most unusual, to get a college degree because he thought everybody should have access to higher education if that was what they desired. But he was truly a believer that education was the key to the American dream, to grasping that with both hands. And although he did not have the benefit of a formal education, he was a lifelong learner. And that really paved the way for me. I had always been involved in volunteering in campaigns, but had never really considered being a candidate until in this district, a long-time representative retired, and only one person put themselves forward for an election. And I just thought after 30 years, voters deserved a choice. They deserved to have a discussion of the issues. And so I had zero clue about politics, but I kind of learned trial by fire. My background is I'm a lawyer. I practiced for over 30 years, both here and in Florida. I did corporate defense work. Sometimes that included harassment litigation. Sometimes it included things that were more boring, like stocks and bonds and employment agreements and things like that. And all three of my children graduated here from JCPS, from public schools, and they all got a great foundation in education. I had that call with my oldest who went to Vanderbilt, and I remember they'd been there about 2 years, and I went, "So are you ready?" And they said, "Oh yeah, nothing here has been as hard as what I dealt with in high school." And
Hmm.
that is what every parent wants to hear, that they're
Most
prepared.
certainly. Most certainly.
So my
Um,
son went to the U.S. Naval Academy and graduated from there. He commissioned into the Marine Corps. And then my youngest one actually just graduated from U of L Law School after also having attended JCPS schools. So during the course of all that, I met another woman who was a teacher at JCPS. And I had stepped back from my big firm experience at what was Greenbaum Dahl and McDonald, and was practicing on my own, and got a phone call one day. And she said, "Have you ever thought about teaching?" And I said, "I don't know any little girl in America who hasn't at some point thought about being a teacher." So she had some students who were falling behind. They did not have IEPs, but they had just kind of fallen through the cracks, and they needed some recovery work. And so I went in on a grant, actually, got an emergency certification, and went in and taught. And it really opened my eyes. I had been PTA president, I had served on the SBDM, but there's no substitute for being in the classroom.
Absolutely.
And so I got the opportunity to do this recovery work for about 3 years. And it was I was a camera. It was a wonderful experience. And it just solidified in my mind how much of a impetus education can be for belief in yourself, belief in your abilities, and opening your eyes to opportunities you didn't even know existed.
So that's a good segue to our next question. We know that students in Kentucky, and I'm sure you saw this in your teaching experience, perhaps with your own children, perhaps from your grandfather and hearing those memories and stories that you recounted with us earlier. We know that students in Kentucky, they face many challenges, but they also face many opportunities. For example, we know that what happens beyond the classroom has a big, big, big output on education outcomes.
Absolutely.
For example, we like to say here, kids don't grow up in silos. Poverty affects health, health affects education, education affects safety, and the list could go on and on and on. So as you think about all of the issues surrounding Kentucky students, what is your particular interest? What's the area around students, families, and education you are interested in? And how might you become a leader in that area in the House of Representatives?
One of the things that concerns me the most, I saw so many students whose parents were working 2 and 3 jobs to keep food on the table and a roof over their head, and children do a bad job of raising themselves. They need supervision. They need parents. They don't need buddies. They need somebody who takes that cell phone, who enforces a bedtime, who makes sure homework is being done, who contacts the teacher if the kid doesn't understand the homework. And my kids passed me in math basically at Algebra 2. So, somebody who can call the teacher and say, "I can't possibly teach this subject, but they're clearly not getting it. And who can we find to help them out?" So I think parents in the home and supervising and directing children is the first place we have to start, which means we need to pay people a living wage. I think the second thing we've got to do is safety in schools and safety in community. We cannot expect a child to grow up healthy if they are living in an area where they can't go outside to play because it's not safe. A child needs to have a childhood. They're not little adults. And so we've got to provide that second foundation, which is some safety. Then the third thing they've got to have is they've got to have the opportunity to believe in themselves. And it doesn't take, the research is clear, it doesn't take a lot, but you've got to have 1 or 2 people in your life as a child who really believes in your potential, who believes you can shoot for the stars. I used to say when I was on SBDM that what every parent wants from a teacher is a teacher who sees the magic in their child. And every child possesses it. Sometimes it's been stomped down, But as parents and teachers, we have to find that magic and let that child believe that they can be all that they want to be.
Well, thank you for that answer. That's a wonderful answer. I know as we reflect more on the education side of things, so we've talked about beyond the classroom. Now we're going to talk more about what happens inside of the classroom. 2 years ago, the Pritchard Committee unveiled a 6-year plan to add $1 billion annually to the state's education budget in strategic areas where investment could be measured for impact. We called it the Big Bold Ask. Even with the impact of the pandemic, the General Assembly made serious progress on that ask in the first 2 budget years of the plan, with key investments in full-day kindergarten, broadband internet access, early literacy, and Kentucky's state university system. The remaining components, those on our to-do list of that ask, include investments in childcare, preschool, and a fund for teaching excellence. So as you reflect on those needs of Kentucky's students, early childhood from 3 and 4 to post-secondary, college, and career, what would you say is the Commonwealth's most pressing need in our education system?
I think pre-K is where we should begin. I've also seen a fair amount of energy around giving latitude to education systems outside the public education system that I'd frankly like to see expended on a public education system. I think that I'd like to see those opportunities for private investment given to our public education system and not to a competing situation. But I do think a good foundation of pre-K is essential. Unfortunately, because economics require that most parents have both people in the workforce, if you have a 2-parent home, nobody's at home to do the things that prepared children for kindergarten in the past. And candidly, our expectations of kindergartners are much higher than they were. We expect a lot more than colors and counting to 10. So you need some dedicated, intentional education. We have a program here that's actually directed to children who are hard of hearing at the Heiser Hearing Institute. And the work that goes on there with those children, because of their difference, is work really that could be done for all of our 3 and 4-year-olds and would make such a difference in their preparedness. And as you know, that education is one of those odd things that the foundation is so critical. And if you don't have a child on track by about 3rd or 4th grade, they appear to continue to fall further and further behind. So those early foundations are so important.
Well, we certainly could not agree more about the importance of early childhood education. And you must be a mind reader as well, because that is our next question. So thank you for that good segue as well. Recently, the Pritchard Committee and a team of statewide partners released a fragile ecosystem for Will Kentucky Childcare Survive When the Dollars Run Out? A fragile ecosystem for a survey completed by over 500 of Kentucky's approximately 1,600 childcare providers, and from 95 out of 120 Kentucky counties, found that once Federal American Rescue Plan, or ARPA, relief dollars run out, over 70% of childcare providers will be forced to raise tuition for parents. Close to 40% indicated that providers would cut staff wages, and over 20% of providers said that they would be left no choice but to permanently close their childcare center. And currently, only about half of all Kentucky children, as you made reference to, arrive to kindergarten prepared. Kentucky ranks 41st in the nation in the number of 3 and 4-year-olds enrolled in preschool. We were just 28th in the nation in 2008, a pretty steep fall. Access to high quality early childhood education, as you know, is critical in ensuring more Kentucky children receive a strong start in school and later in life. So our question is, how can Kentucky ensure more children access high quality early learning? You've talked a bit about pre-K, but I wonder if you can expand on the process by which more children, more families might gain that critical early childhood access.
I don't think it's a secret probably to anybody in your organization that funding as a percentage of state revenue for education, public education, has dropped precipitously since KERA was enacted. It has to be a priority, not to throw in a theological reference, but where your treasure is, that there also is your heart. And the priority of the Commonwealth really should be, after the basics, should be the future of our children, because, and it's not just an education issue. It's not just a touchy-feely issue. It's also an economic issue.
That's correct.
If we want to attract high quality jobs that pay our people well, that are the jobs of the future and not the jobs of the past, we have to have a quality education system, and it has to start early. And if you want, Kentucky has a very low workforce participation rate outside of the metropolitan areas. And one of the big impediments is access to childcare. And I'm not suggesting that teachers are babysitters, because they're certainly not. But to have access to free public education from the age of 3 on would really empower so many families to be able to afford quality childcare in those early years, where it's only a much shorter duration that you're going to have to finance that. And for many families, the costs of childcare are as much as a mortgage or more. And so to get quality childcare and that good foundation, I can't think of a much better use of public dollars than to make sure our children are safe and healthy and have a good foundation for education.
Thank you so much for that answer. We appreciate it. We're going to shift our direction to maybe children who are just a little bit older. You mentioned a living wage in your remarks today. You've also mentioned, how do we get good, high quality people in for our kids into Kentucky, into every district in the state. So nationally, we hear a lot about teacher shortages. Even before the pandemic, we saw a decline in the number of students entering teacher prep programs, and even those with those credentials opting for a career outside of the classroom. We know that high quality teaching is the surest way to grow educational outcomes for all students. So here's our question. How can state leaders work to ensure that Kentucky's best and brightest enter and remain in the teaching profession? And what are some steps that can be taken to ensure quality teachers in every Kentucky classroom?
Oh, so many things. Let's start with the size of classes. You can't individualize instruction for 30 people in 30 different ways in 45 minutes to an hour. So our classroom sizes have to be smaller. Secondly, I think we have to remember, and I'm a lot older than you, but it used to be, if you were a woman and you wanted to work, you basically could be a secretary, nurse, or a teacher. That was about the only options you had. And as a consequence, because there were fewer options, I think education and teaching had a particular appeal, because if you had children, your hours and your schedule mirrored theirs to a large degree. Now, the same people who are qualified enough and smart enough and energetic enough to be teachers can also be anything else they want. And yet teaching wages have not remained competitive. I think there's a misnomer or a misperception that teachers only work 9-10 months a year. But if you've ever been a teacher, you know those other 2 months are spent preparing the classroom. There's the personal expenses that teachers endure to make their classroom hospitable and warm and inviting. All of those things. And then last but not least, we have to talk about behavior, which circles back to my first answer about parents at home, because those social skills, those abilities to deal with other people, the ability to marshal your anger or your upset in a socially appropriate way, that's taught at home first, at least we hope so. In addition, we have a lot of students who have a lot of stress in their life, and we need better counseling and other services. I've been in too many classrooms where you have a child who has a serious emotional or behavioral challenge, and there's nowhere to get them help. There's nowhere to send them. If you send them to the office, they get sent back. And that disrupts the entire class. We have to have a better setup to deal with these children who need extra supports. All of those things. And I think we cannot dismiss the lack of respect that teachers have been shown through several administrations and the legislature. Teachers have been demonized, for lack of a better word. It was pretty interesting during the pandemic. They were the heroes, but then they were also the cause of all the problems. And that is not true and not fair. I've often said that we have done to teachers what we have done to law enforcement and other public servants, which is society has a problem and we don't know how to fix them all, but we're going to send them all to you. We're not going to give you more money, more resources, more training, more staff. And when you fail to fix those problems, and you will, then we're going to blame you. And I think that's an unfair burden on people who I've seen personally go way beyond the call and scope of their job to try to pull a kid up to the next level.
Well, thank you for that answer. We certainly appreciate it. We're going to talk a little bit next about the quality of Kentucky's high school diploma. When we think about a high school diploma, it should be evidence that a student is ready to succeed after high school. But unfortunately, too many students today graduate diploma in hand without having mastered the knowledge and skills required to be successful in college, career, and life. The Pritchard Committee community profiles for all school districts across the state show the state graduation rate in 2021 at 90%. However, the state rate for meeting college readiness and benchmarks, like in math, for example, is at 30%.
Ooh.
And despite Kentucky ranking 3rd in the nation in high school graduation, Kentucky ranks 44th in the nation in higher education attainment and in median household income. So how can Kentucky ensure both rigorous and meaningful coursework and provide the support students need to be successful in their transition to their post-high school life?
I'm a big advocate of what we used to call vocational education for students who are not necessarily highly academically motivated. And I think that it is important to provide those options for people who are more hands-on learners or visual learners and not just responsive to a talking head at the front of the classroom. So I think that if we could structure our evaluation of attainment in a way that addresses different kinds of learners, that would probably be helpful. But that goes back to what I was talking about, which is addressing behavior in the classroom and smaller class sizes. I've taught students who fell behind, I think, in large measure because they were well behaved and they didn't take up a lot of the teacher's time, and so it was easy for them to fall through the cracks. I think that the ability to have a smaller classroom and the funding for that, as well as the opportunity for people to demonstrate their competence in other manners. I think also we have an organization in Louisville called First Build, and they take students who have dropped out and they begin to learn trades. And during that process, then they also finish classwork that allows them to qualify for a GED. And many of those participants will tell you they didn't understand how, for example, math was going to relate to their life. I think that for some students, it's important to teach them concepts in a way that they can see the connection to what they will be doing after high school. Whether it's being able to convert a calculation for purposes of building a house or a bridge, or higher math, such as you might need in the sciences. But I think that if you can tie those things, I had students, as I said, I taught recovery. I had students and the word problem would be phrased about fertilizer, and they didn't know what fertilizer was, and you couldn't get them past that because they were so fixated on what was fertilizer. It's like, I don't care, don't think about fertilizer, think about pie, think about something you do know. It doesn't really matter, but they get stuck on this concept they don't understand. So I think that, and I'm not a big fan of standardized testing. I understand people want to know how schools are doing, but the reality is I don't know a teacher in Kentucky who can't tell you how a student is doing without a test.
Well, thank you very much for those answers. I know you've talked a lot about the importance of parents. And at the Pritchard Committee, we believe that a child's first, best, and most important teacher is their parent. So often we hear that parents feel left out of the education policymaking process. How can legislators work to engage parent voice earlier in the decision-making process?
I think probably many parents are intimidated by schools, perhaps because they didn't have the best experience themselves. But I think that taking teacher-parent conferences closer to where parents live helps. I think it's also helpful if parents realize that a parent-teacher conference is just not when your kid's in trouble. It's a check-in so that we can know you and you can know us, and we can communicate openly and freely, and we have a level of trust in each other that we both want what is best for this child. And we just have different roles to serve and different strengths that we bring to it. But obviously, we need to work as a team, because a teacher can't control what happens in 15 hours of a child's day, yet the 7 hours or 8 hours that they're at school are the most important hours in terms of educational attainment. I will also say, I think that it would not be a bad idea to slightly lengthen the school day so we can put back physical education. The need for that physical activity, for that physical release, doesn't just stop magically at 5th grade. Kids need the opportunity to get out, to play, to socialize, to be with their friends, and to burn off some energy. So I would support a slightly longer school day if it allowed time for activities that are not necessarily educational, quote unquote, but are part of raising the whole child.
Right. Excellent response. Well, we want to give you the last word here for our final question. So if there are Kentuckians who are Jefferson Countyans, Oldham Countyans, who their prime motivator in showing up to the ballot box in November is strengthening education birth through post-secondary, why should they vote for you?
Education has become really one of the primary reasons that I have run for office, because I do believe so strongly that that is what is going to set Kentucky up for the future. I see, and I wasn't raised here. It's the old line of, I wasn't born in Kentucky, but I got here as soon as I could. I see so much in our history and in the development of Kentucky, so many wonderful initiatives started here. We were a pioneer state. We were the forefront of opportunities, and we showed that when KERA was adopted. And I think we need to reclaim that title as a leader. I think we are on the cusp of a great new opportunity, and it starts with raising this next generation to be on the forefront of whatever the next century holds.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for joining us today for the Candidate Forum. You'll be seeing it again, hopefully in your local media, on the Pritchard Committee website, via social media as well. Ladies and gentlemen who will be watching this recording, this has been Maria Sorolis, a candidate for House District 48, part of Jefferson and Oldham County. Thank you so much for your time, for your service, and we look forward to seeing you again shortly.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Have a good day. Thank you. And so joining us next, admitting now from the waiting room, is the incumbent candidate, Ken Fleming, currently serving House District 48 in the Kentucky House of Representatives. We'll give Ken a few moments to get his audio and visual in order. And here is the representative himself. How are you today, Representative Fleming?
How you doing, Ben? Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. We just heard from your opponent in House District 48, Maria Sorolis, on a number of education questions. We're excited to get your input and your perspective on those same questions. Before we begin, however, I also want to remind that this is being recorded and will be shared with others via the Pritchard Committee website, perhaps some in the local media, as well as on social media. With that said, welcome Representative Fleming. We want to give the voters an opportunity to get to know you first as a person and second as a representative and candidate. So if it's okay with you, we'll hop right into our first question. So Representative Fleming, what was the call that made you enter public service? Is there a leader you most admire? Were there particular attributes of that leader that you too hope to exemplify? What's your why for running for office, and what's motivated you to do what you're doing today?
Ben, I've always had a call to serve the community in various fashions and formats. I've been involved in quite a few different committees, organizations, profit and nonprofit throughout my life. And I started into government. My family has been involved in government on several levels, not on the federal level from congressional representation, but also in the White House, as well as in the local government. And just felt that there was something to call to continue those efforts to serve the community as well as serve the state in whatever fashion I can serve in. So I served on the Metro Council for about 12 years, and my attributes basically come from starting something new or fixing things. And so when I was in Metro Council, that was something new. The government merged back in 2002. And so it was a great opportunity to use my skill sets from a business perspective, as well as my nonprofit orientation to help out the city of Louisville and the whole area. And then got into the state government when Dr. DeWeese decided to retire. He wanted me to see if I consider getting back into this. And I was out of politics for several years, and I said, okay. Have a little loose nut, as all politicians do, but I think most politicians, not all, we have a sense to serve the community, making sure we have policy and funding that is in the best position possible to move Kentucky forward, not only from economic development, which is one pillar, but also education, which is the other pillar. And that's true for any state, local government, and really for the nation, in order to compete and provide future leaders as much resources as possible to put us in a better position.
Absolutely. And I'm thrilled to hear that education is one of your platforms in this current campaign. When we talk about students in Kentucky, we know that our students face both many challenges and many opportunities. We know that what happens beyond the classroom has a big impact on educational outcomes. We like to say that kids don't grow up in silos. Poverty affects health, health affects education, education affects safety, and so on and so on. So as you think about all the issues surrounding Kentucky's students, what is your particular interest? What's the area around students, families, and education that you are interested in? And how might you continue to be a leader in that area?
Well, education, as I mentioned a second ago, is one of the two pillars of any successful community and state. And I take a holistic approach. And as you said, Ben, not taken as a silo mentality. So in looking at things in a holistic point of view, you got to bring in not only the student, but also the community, but probably more important, the family unit. No matter how that family unit is made up, where they come from, their social demographics, backgrounds, or you've got to take this from a holistic point of view. And when you look at kids, and no matter if they're in elementary school, preschool, or in college, we got to have the resources and the ability and the assets in order to provide the best opportunities possible. And it goes down to having resources in terms of having the best teachers possible. We're giving them those tools and resources to do that. We need to have facilities in order to learn it. We got to make sure we have good technology. So whatever we can do in order to get a holistic approach to students that wraps around the family and wraps around the teachers and administrators of our educational system, no matter if it's in secondary or post-secondary, we need to provide those resources. And the budget, as you know, I'm on the the Appropriations and Revenue Committee, and find that we have significantly increased. And I know you've got a big bold ask, I believe, as y'all's campaign. I think we made some pretty good strides in terms of those allocations. Is it to the level where we want to know? But I think if you look over the past 5 or 6 years, contrary to all the years prior to that, we're making some inroads, and we're making some strides in order to make that happen.
Well, we're glad that you brought up the big bold ask, because that's actually our next question. So 2 years ago, as you know, the Pritchard Committee unveiled a 6-year plan to add $1 billion annually to the state's education budget in strategic areas where the investment could be measured for impact. The General Assembly made serious progress on that ask in the first 2 years of the plan, with key investments in things such as full-day kindergarten, broadband internet access, early literacy, and Kentucky's state university system. Those remaining components on our to-do list include needing investments in childcare, preschool, and a fund for teaching excellence. So Representative Fleming, as you reflect on the needs of Kentucky students, early childhood through post-secondary, what would you say is the Commonwealth's most pressing need for our education system?
Yeah, that's a good question, and for all of us to collaborate and cooperate and approach to come up with a solution and what is a priority. I'll be quite frank. You know, I'm on the post-secondary education, and I'm using my business background in terms of going through and taking an inventory of our assets and where we are and where we need to go. That's what I'm looking at in terms of the educating our kids. When it comes to, I think the priority, I think it's a long-term approach. And I look at it, you got short-term and long-term. The short-term is that we need to look at our workforce when it comes to teachers. In Jefferson County, and I know the Pritchard Committee looks at the whole state, and I can, somewhat address what's going on in the state, but I can come from a Jefferson County point of view, and the teachers need to have a stronger support system from training, from education, education in terms of what I'm trying to say, programs, professional development. That's what I'm trying to think of. In order to give them those resources and look at collaborating between the post-secondary and look at dual credits and look at these stipends for scholarships to bring bring students into a classroom so we can develop a nice steady stream of good quality teachers that not only look at early childhood education, but also for those individuals that are in the secondary and post-secondary. So when you look at things, I always go back to the bare brass tacks things, and that is starting early, having intervention, having those resources in order to do that. And I want to put a plug in, and I looked at the Pritchard Committee's website some time ago, and I looked at it just recently. And I want to challenge the Pritchard Committee to look at mental health. As you know, Ben, I run a mental health center for the past several years, and my eyes have been totally open to where the deficits are in terms of kids. These kids need to have a stable environment. They need to have a support system within our school system when it comes to mental health. Mental health wellness needs to be addressed, and I challenge the Pritchard Committee to have that on their bid bowl ask for more money to go into those particular programs, because I tell you what, if the kids do not feel safe, do not have the resources, do not have the teacher support, which I think they do on that aspect, then all the efforts that y'all go through, all the funding you ask for, it might be might not be worth it. I mean, your efforts might go down the drain. So I would challenge y'all to look at mental health when it comes to that. So I can go on and on about that, but I would say early childhood intervention, providing those resources, getting teachers the best resources possible to help those kids, because as you know, on a long-term basis, if you have a good start and like 3 years old, or 5, or even 12 years old, it sets a wonderful foundation, and they can
Absolutely.
reflect on those things. So sorry, I went a little bit too long, but that's part of my thought, is really get more focused on the early aspect of things.
Well, actually, that is a perfect wrap up to that question, and takes us into our next question, which focuses on early childhood education. Recently, the Pritchard Committee and a team of statewide partners released a Fragile Ecosystem 4, Will Kentucky Childcare Survive When the Dollars Run Out? A Fragile Ecosystem 4, a survey completed by over 500 of Kentucky's approximately 1,600 childcare providers, and from 95 out of 120 Kentucky counties, found that once Federal American Rescue Plan, or ARPA, relief dollars run out, 70% of providers would be forced to raise tuition for working parents. 40% of childcare centers indicated that they would cut their staff wages. 30% said that they would have to lay off staff. And over 20% of childcare providers indicated they would be forced to permanently close their doors. And currently, as you stated earlier, only about half of all Kentucky children arrive to kindergarten prepared, and Kentucky ranks 41st in the nation in the number of 3- and 4-year-olds enrolled in preschool, a fall from 28th in the nation just back in 2008. Access to high-quality early childhood education is critical in ensuring more Kentucky children receive a strong start in school and in life. So, Representative Fleming, how can Kentucky ensure more children access high-quality early learning?
There's a couple of approaches that one may take. And I'm thinking of public-private partnerships. And I have used that, and I'm working on a healthcare initiative that will bring in a collaborative and cooperative approach with the private sector that will team up with these various resources and various learning centers in order to give them support, not only from a financial standpoint, but also from a program point of view, and lend individuals who have some background understanding into those type of environments. And I come back, Ben, just a few minutes ago, is that holistic approach. We need to support the families as much as possible. And one thing I know, I think y'all behind that, 499, Representative Heverin, and I was a co-sponsor of that. She approached me early on, and I told her, run with it. I'll support that. What we can do to give child support to those families, particularly when it comes to low income or 200% of the poverty level, we've got to give those individuals, those families, as much support in terms of childcare, so they can be in an environment, they being the kids, be in an environment that will help flourish and give those in particular reading and writing and basic skills the best way we can. So like I said, we need to look at getting more of a cooperative approach with the private sector, as well as the public sector, in order to look at those sorts of things. When it comes to funding, I said early on, 2 pillars is the economic development and education, and we need to put as much money as we can in there in order to do that. And so saying that, I'm a pretty big believer in that we need to have measurements and we need to have outcomes to see how well the dollars are being spent and making sure we reach those levels. Because I understand that, I think the K-Prep report coming out soon. Is that right, Ben?
Yes, typically comes out each fall.
Yeah, and I'm hearing some not very wonderful news and coming that, which I hope is not the case. But there are some other studies that have been out there that over the past several years has really put our kids behind the 8 ball. And you can peel that any way you want, but it is what it is. And we've got to look at how to address those initiatives early on to give them support, not only those kids and the families, but also with the teachers.
I know Representative Fleming, you mentioned earlier, the drive to get high quality exemplary teachers into every Kentucky classroom. Nationally, we do hear a lot about teacher shortages. And of course, research shows that high quality teaching is the surest way to grow educational outcomes for students. So what in particular can Kentucky do to both recruit and retain the best and brightest for all students in all classrooms across the state?
Yeah, well, you're talking about the workforce, right?
Correct.
Yeah,
high quality teachers in particular.
Yeah, I know it. Well, that's throughout a lot of the professions and industries and so forth. I think I mentioned a couple of those already to you, Ben, and that is the dual credit. We need to expand that and hype that up more in order to provide dual credits for these kids. For kids come in that they can apply to college education, so we can get it goes back to early intervention, even though it's not these kids aren't 3, 4, or 5 years old. But if you get them to elementary school, and I'm not elementary, when you get into high school, we can have those dual credits and start laying the groundwork and the path for them to get out of school earlier, in terms of graduating and getting into these programs and so forth. So dual credits is that we need to expand that a whole lot more in quite a different areas, particularly when it comes in education. I think we need to look at that. The other thing is a teacher apprentice program. Have some type of a structure or have it or strengthen the apprentice program for teachers, and also looking at scholarships. You give us kids a scholarships, then have them go into the classroom and have more of an interactive involvement in terms of within the classroom and so forth. So those are some of the things in order to help the workforce out. And I know there's many other things out there as well, but those are the type of things that's off the top of my head.
Well, thank you for that. Our next question is actually around the quality of Kentucky's high school education, in particular, a high school diploma. When we think about a high school diploma, it should be evidence that a student is ready to succeed after high school. Unfortunately, too many students today graduate diploma in hand without having mastered the knowledge and skills required to be successful in college, career, and life. The Pritchard Committee community profiles for all school districts show the state graduation rate in 2021 at 90%. However, the state rate for meeting college readiness benchmarks in math, for example, is at 30%. And despite Kentucky ranking 3rd in the nation in high school graduation, Kentucky ranks 44th in the nation in higher education attainment and in median household income. So the question is this: how can Kentucky ensure both a rigorous, meaningful coursework and provide the support students need to successfully transition to their post-high school life?
Let me, I'm going down several paths. Why don't you restate the question? Because I'm going down several paths, and I want to make sure I understand because it's a pretty heavy question. So let me,
Yes.
So repeat exactly what you're looking for.
So our question here is in 2 parts. Part 1, how can Kentucky ensure both a rigorous and meaningful coursework in advancing to obtain that high school diploma? And how can we provide the support that students need to successfully transition to their post-high school life, whether that be college, career?
To a certain degree, as I mentioned early on, is that having outcome and measurements, not only for the kids, and what they achieve, but also, for the school itself and the teachers and so forth. So having a certain degree of outcomes and measurements for those kids to have a goal to achieve in order to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish, that's one thing we need to look at. To transition into, to work a lot of life after school or either high school or college, there needs to be pathway. Not everybody's going to go to college. So there's got to be a good path from a non-college path to an apprentice or to a vocational school path. There needs to be a very good structure in order to help those kids to transition over. And one way, as I mentioned to you before, is have a community, have a partnership with the private sector or other organizations to come in and bring them into more of a work on the job program, or more of a in the work environment type of approach to help out with those transitions. It's not an easy transition. And it'll take some effort to come back together, but those are two things that just, off the top of my head, I can think of. That's something that needs to be continued to explore. It's a pretty, like I said, it's a pretty heavy question. And I think nobody has an answer to it, but I think collectively we can come up with an approach in order to make those transitions as easy as possible, so they can have those jobs, no matter if it's, if it's in a high paying job or a job that's providing, building a home or building a building or something like that. So we need to have those type of structures set up.
Well, thank you very much for your answer to that question. I know Representative Fleming, earlier in our talk today, you referenced doing everything possible to help families. At the Pritchard Committee, we believe that a child's first, best, and most important teacher is their parent. So often we hear that parents feel left out of the education policy-making process. How can legislators work to engage parents earlier in the decision-making process?
Well, that's basically, that's a community outreach approach. You can set up incentives, you can set up funding mechanisms, you can set up various all types of things that you can do. But I think part of the challenge we have from a society is that, unfortunately, that society needs to have a stronger approach to supporting those kids who aren't in a position to help themselves. And we as society need to get them in a better position and to expose that, and to do that. Part of what, I'm going a little bit off the what should be out of your question, but we, running a mental health center, we have therapists in schools that we see a very, very tough environment, and the parental guidance and involvement is not real strong. And so who's going to pick up the slack and try to help them out? Well, most time it falls on the school education. And we need to have whatever programs we can come up with from a collaborative approach to help those kids that are in a difficult situation. But in any event, providing support for the family unit, once again, no matter how it's made up, it needs to be there. And from a legislative standpoint, we need to have some wraparound, or we need to have some mindset in terms of providing those programs. Like I said, childcare, we put in the childcare assistant program. So those are some of the things that that we probably need to, really need to consider about looking at programs that will help the family as a unit, so they can be more involved. I mean, we go out and talk to families, the parents, the mother or a father or the grandparent, and so forth, and try and have various mechanisms that we try to get them involved, to show what the progress is of the kids and show them what the situation they're in and so forth. So it's a tough question, Ben, in terms of how we can provide assistance to the family. But I think there's a will and effort from General Assembly, from myself, that we need to have those type of we need to have a very stronger effort to provide uplifting policies and funding.
Absolutely. Well, Representative Fleming, you've been very gracious today with your time. We do have just one last question, and it's because we want to give you the last word today. So election day is coming up. If there is a member of House District 48 who's showing up to the voting booth and they're voting solely on Kentucky education, birth through post-secondary, why should that individual vote for you?
Because I have led a life of giving myself to others, and to give them a hand up in order to provide the most opportunities that kids can have. And I've proved it time in and time out in doing that. So based on my leadership skills, based on my business background, I have the ability to take situations, and I've proved it on many cases, situations when it comes to Metro Council or state government, to peel back a situation and take an inventory of where we are, and then develop a policy and strategy in order to give kids the best opportunities possible. So like I said, I've got the leadership abilities. I've got a good insight on how to approach things. I've got a knack for getting into a situation. I don't have too much about it, and I've been quite successful. Like for aerial survey and mapping, I didn't know anything about that. I turned the company around, and it's in a better position. This nonprofit I run right now, we were in a bad situation. I've turned it around, and we're in a better situation. So with the education that we're faced with, in terms of not being very high up the rankings on several categories, it's my goal to dive more into education, and that's what leadership, at least on the House side, is tapping me in to use my analytical abilities to peel these numbers back to find stronger funding mechanisms, so we have a good, strong outcomes and results.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Representative Fleming. As I said earlier, we certainly appreciate it. For those who are watching the recording or will be here in the future, again, this is current incumbent Representative Ken Fleming of District 48, representing part of Jefferson and Oldham counties. We hope that you were able to listen to both candidates today. Hopefully it helps you in making your choice at the ballot box. And we look forward to seeing how both Representative Fleming and candidate Sorolis fare in this November's election. Thank you again, Ken, and have a good day.